Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today, I have with me Anthony Kent. He serves as the Associate Secretary for the Ministerial Association of the General Conference. Thank you for joining me today, Anthony. Did I get that whole association and title correct there? Okay, good. Because I think I had always I think I knew that the Ministerial Association was an association, but I think I often sometimes still consider you a department. What's the difference between a department and an association?
Well, the Ministerial Association, it's an association of peers. We're not the boss. We don't direct pastors. We support and resource pastors. So it's a gathering of peers. Pastors, elders, deacons, deaconesses, those in ministry together. Okay,
well, that helps me. Now I understand a little bit better, and I will remember that it's an association. So the first time, I've seen you for a while, but the time that you made the big impression on me, we go to the same church, and I remember you riding your bicycle into our church along with a number of other people. And I know that there was a special reasoning behind
You're
this
making me
bike
blush.
ride. Yeah, it's not often you get a bunch of presidents of, conferences or divisions and GC people riding their bikes in bike attire, not in their suits, into a church service. So it definitely was a very memorable event. But what was more memorable than that was the heartfelt reason that you shared with our church as to why all of these men and one woman had gathered to ride their bicycles. And I want to start there. A long time ago in a far-off land, tell me a little bit about your great-great-grandfather.
Okay. Well, it starts in the 1800s, and it actually starts not so much with my great-great-grandfather, but in Scotland. In 1846, a guy by the name of Philip Ainsley Reekie was born. Scotsman. What else would you expect in Scotland? And grew up happily married with 4 children, and tragedy struck. His wife died. He remarried. The second marriage was an absolute disaster. So he was in a difficult situation. So with his 4 children, he emigrated from Scotland to Australia looking for a new life. And he arrived in the early 1800s in Melbourne, early 1880s in Melbourne. And somebody gave him a book, Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith. He read it, completely changed his life, transformed him in every way. He became a Seventh-day Adventist. He had a job, this guy Philip Reekie, he had a job as an engraver, on metal. He threw that in because he wanted to, I presume, engrave God's word, God's love on people's heart. And he got a bicycle, and he rode this bike thousands of miles as a literature evangelist, sharing Christian Adventist books. And he rode through cities, towns, villages in the middle of nowhere. And one particular day, he rode up in this middle of nowhere place, not even Australians have heard of this place, called Ugowra. And seriously, it's remote. And there's a guy ploughing behind his horse. And that was my great-great-grandfather. But something had happened in our family just prior to Philip Reekie arriving. My great-great-grandparents, their names were Tom and Mary Kent. Tom and Mary, what else would it be?
It sounds very good.
They had 11 kids.
That's a few kids.
It is. Mary was 45. She caught pneumonia, and she knew she wasn't going to survive. Their youngest child, she was still nursing, the youngest one. And she said to Tom, they were nominal Christians at best. And she said to Tom, I'm not going to make it. But she said, promise me that when your time comes, you'll meet me in heaven, and do all that you can so that the kids will join us. Tom didn't know how to keep that promise, but he made that promise. And Mary did die tragically. First thing he did was he went and bought a Bible, started reading it, and then that day he's ploughing in the middle of nowhere, and Philip Reiki rides up to him on a bicycle and sells him The Great Controversy. And he read it, he struggled with it, there was material in there that he really wrestled with, but finally he accepted it. And he thought he was the only Sabbath observer in the whole country. His family, his kids, except for the very youngest one, thought he'd gone nuts. They thought he had religious mania. And anyway, he would go down to the river which bordered their farm with the and just take his Bible down and keep Sabbath there by the river. And then one particular weekend he was in Sydney and he was in a park and he was keeping Sabbath in a park, and in the distance he heard people singing, and they were singing hymns, and he followed his ears and found the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Wow.
So that's back in the 1880s, 1890s, and that was how my father's side of the family came into the church.
That is an incredible legacy. To be able to know that story is even more special. To have had that heritage passed on, which is one of the reasons why we even do this podcast, because knowing these stories of how God is moving in our lives isn't just for those of us who are here now. This is actually a gift to future generations so they can understand God's faithfulness, just as you were able to, obviously not through a recording, but be able to have that story passed down. Now, you said that's how your father's side came. So does your mother's? I've never heard the mother's side of this.
Well, there's a little bit more that I should share about my father's, and then I want to come to my mother's. My great-great-grandfather became really active. He prayed for all of his kids, and they all accepted the message, and they were all baptized. At least 2 of his sons became pastors. And then of his grandchildren, there were 5 pastors in one line. And then, there's been others. I think there's been 11 Pastor Kents from that. And he also shared with his neighbours. There were 5 other families that lived around him. And he shared the book and he gave Bible studies to them as well. There were the Gersbachs, the Thompsons, the Chapmans, the Greys, and the Packhams. They all became Adventists and their children. An extraordinary thing. And when you count up the generations, the descendants, and those that they've brought into and discipled into Jesus and become Adventists, the minimum estimate is 20,000 people from just one copy, one faithful guy on a bicycle riding up to a guy while he's ploughing. So this, coming back to your original introduction, this is what motivated us to ride our bikes and to share.
So we're going to get to your mother's story, but I want to ask you a question. You work in the ministerial area now. And this is, it's not necessarily your personal life story, but I think it's an intriguing thing. The Great Controversy was the book that really helped him pivot to be able to truly understand. There's a lot of people who think that it's not as relevant now. It's dated. It was written back in the 1880s. It's in old language. The stories are old. Why is it still relevant today? Because you handed out Great Controversies while you were on your bicycle. Why is it still relevant today?
Okay. In my mind, I think it's answering questions that people are asking today. And I think it's very current and more current than we realise. There's a lot of literature around saying people love and respect Jesus, but they've given up on the church. They've given up on the institution of the broader universal church. They're dismayed with it. The great thing about the Great Controversy is it explains what's happened so that people have given up on the church, and it provides an answer to it.
So it's actually perfect for a post-Christian mind.
Exactly. Now, I like to share them with a conversation, telling people a little about it, preparing them for it. And I think it's more current and more relevant than we actually realise.
You make me want to go read it again.
You don't have to read it. You can actually listen to it.
Maybe it'd be one of those books. There's certain books I just cannot listen to, and there's some books I can listen to. It's a personal thing. It's like autobiographies I can listen to, but like thought and leadership books I can't. I think it's because I want to underline things.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm a book person. So.
and it traces the incredible faithfulness of people in the most adverse circumstances, and it really fortifies faith. My
favorite chapter actually is the stories of Huss and Jerome,
mm-hmm.
because you watch someone who kind of gives up, and then someone who stands firm, and then you see how that transforms someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading that chapter when I was probably 16, 17, and it left a huge impression on me. I'm like, even if I do make the wrong choice, I can still come back and make the right one. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there is redemption for you. You, like, if you've fallen, you don't have to fall forever. And, but you can also just be faithful. And I think there's just like a promise in that to me, like a hope that it's okay, Alyssa. Just keep doing your best. Be faithful to God. And even if you fall, He's always there.
Exactly.
But let's get back to your mother's side of the family. Sorry. We keep tangenting.
Well, again, there's the great controversy in this story too.
Really?
Yeah. My grandfather, his grandfather came from Scotland.
Okay.
And they were pretty staunch Scots. And my grandfather, World War I started. He was a Presbyterian, and he enlisted in the AIF, the Australian Infantry. And he went off and did frontline in the trenches in France and Belgium. And he went through ghastly stuff. His best friend, I don't want to go into too many details, but his best friend standing right beside him was killed right there and then. One of the most dangerous things in the whole war was the task of crawling forward of the front trenches, marking on a map where the enemy was, who they were and their approximate numbers, and then crawling back. And that was the task assigned to my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
And he lived. He was caught in no man's land alone for 2 weeks. You know, he went through incredible stuff. He had an artillery shell land between his feet in the mud, and it didn't explode. He was wounded. I'll never forget, as an old man, he had shrapnel above his eye, and the older he got, the more it used to hang down, this piece of shrapnel. He'd been shot, but he survived. His best friend didn't, and he came home. And he was a strong, resolute man, you know. He wasn't a feeble kind of guy. But every night, there was an horrendous nightmare. And it wasn't just a wrestling in the bed. It was screaming out nightmares. He was married. He had 2 daughters, but they'd lost 4 sons. And they lived in the middle of nowhere once again.
Is most of Australia the middle of
There's
nowhere?
a lot of empty space in Australia. But they lived on a farm, and it was at the end of the road, at the end of the valley, the last house. And you had to cross a creek twice, and there was no bridge. And in 1926, My grandfather's there with his wife, 2 daughters. He's out working on the farm. His name's Reg. His wife's name is Jean. And she's at home with the 2 children. And in August that year, a guy on a horse rides up to their farm. He also, there's a bit of Scotland in all of this.
Yeah.
His name was John Craig Sterling. He had graduated from Avondale as a theology student, and before you were accepted into ministry, in those days, you did a year of literature evangelism. He rode up to their farm. Jean wasn't particularly interested in the book, but she felt sorry for him. And I wonder if she thought that there's something in here that might get us through the night without the grief of losing 4 sons, without a screaming nightmare. Is there something in this? So she bought the copy of The Great Controversy. And incidentally, in that whole year, he sold 1 copy of Great Controversy in August 1926, and he sold it to my grandmother.
Oh, wow.
She bought it, left it on the kitchen table, and my grandfather, his name's Reg McLennan, he came home from working on the farm, picked up the book and said, "What's this?" And Grandma said, "This nice Mr. Sterling came by on a horse. I felt sorry for him, so I bought this book." He started reading it, threw his pipe in the fire, studied his Bible really carefully and examined it. Yeah, this is true. And he became an Adventist. And that little girl was 2 years old. She was my mother,
Oh,
1926. And so this idea of people meeting people and sharing this book, it's kind of in my blood, if that makes sense.
It does. It does make sense to me. So your father and your mother meet, and they have Anthony. Where were you born, Anthony? Were you in the middle of nowhere as well?
In a small city in New South Wales, not too far from where my mother's family was, in Lismore. And born in a small city. Not much has changed there in the intervening years, but it's a beautiful area and a great area to grow up. I had 2 really good parents, 4 very good grandparents, and 2 terrific brothers and a wonderful sister.
Sounds like a wonderful family life. Now, you grew up Adventist then, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, although we are born into Adventism, at some point we'll probably hear where it becomes real to you. But so you're going to I'm guessing there is a local Adventist congregation in your area?
Yep.
Do you go to Adventist schooling? Is that a thing in that area?
It is, but my parents had a different philosophy. They decided to send me to a state school.
Okay.
Their philosophy was, the sooner you learn to stand up on your own 2 feet and take what's going to come your way, the better. Learn it in school. So every morning we had family worship, prayer. When I was very young, I can remember each evening my parents would go through the Sabbath school quarterly with me. It was Adventism, Christianity, Jesus, what Jesus did for humanity and his second coming was a big, big thing in our family. Really big.
Now, sometimes people who've read The Great Controversy, they can be like, oh, it kind of makes you feel scared about life. When you were growing up, because the way you're talking about it is this very gospel centered, this Jesus centered, which actually is really the heart of Adventism. Do you feel like that was kind of more your upbringing, though? Was this just Christ centeredness, or was there? Because sometimes we learn and we grow. And
I did have a prayer that Jesus, when he would return, that he would come back at 10 past 9 at night, because bedtime was 9 o'clock. I would have just said my prayers and I'd have a chance. I'm a sinner. I'm an Adventist, but I'm a sinner. And I thought, my parents taught me to kneel beside my bed and to pray and to confess my sins every night. And I thought, if Jesus could only come.
Right after.
Exactly. Before. I'll make it. But I went to Avondale. I went to university for a year. That was a Jonah year.
We're moving very quickly here.
Yeah.
Now, real quickly, just going back here for a few seconds here. What about your high school years? Sometimes our teen years can be a little more fun. And for some of us, like me, this is actually when I had my conversion experience, was in my teenage years. What were your teen years like?
Very, very fond memories of those. I grew up with a wonderful church, a very supportive church. The elders, the deacons, the deaconesses, the pastors, they were good. They really cared for me. They loved me. So, lady in the church, my parents, they worked hard. They were very faithful, but we didn't grow up in an extravagant family. I had a teddy bear. It was given to me by Myrtle Shelford. When my mum died, she had 4 boxes of treasures that she had all lined up for her 4 kids. Sitting on the top of mine was the teddy bear that I'd had from being very, very young. I'll never forget the Sabbath. Myrtle Shelford gave me my teddy bear. I'm not a Mr. Bean, how he has his teddy bear, but that was my teddy bear. It was given to me. I look back at the elders. They were the Pathfinder leaders and directors. They really invested in the kids. Men like Neville Leeson, Lloyd Chilcott, they really had a ministry for youth, had us to their homes, went out, took us camping, did stuff with us. They really demonstrated the love of Jesus. And that was really significant. Another elder, he was often preaching in other smaller country churches. He would never keep the pulpit for himself. He would get the youth, load up his car. We'd all have, 5 or 7 minutes each. We'd prepare the sermon with him, and he'd take us out. And wow, I was preaching at 14, and I was conducting evangelistic meetings, public evangelistic meetings when I was in high school. I was giving Bible studies to friends. That's how involved I was in a state school with sharing.
What I love about this was that as a young person, you felt empowered in your church. You felt that you were a part of the church. You were peers with those individuals. They didn't make you feel like there was some separation. They mentored you and walked alongside you and encouraged you to do the very same things that they themselves were doing.
Yeah. Let me hasten to add too, I wasn't a perfect kid. I made mistakes. Really? Yeah. And in spite of that, they still loved and encouraged me.
I think that's such a great testimony to our time. We talk a lot about young people. They're leaving the church, as our older people too. But we talk a lot about young people leaving the church. I don't think most young people want to leave the church, Anthony. I really don't. But are we giving them a reason to stay? And what I'm hearing from you is that they gave you a reason to stay. You were not perfect. You had your challenges, but you felt incredibly loved.
Yeah.
And you felt supported, and you knew that they stood beside you, whether you were the good kid or sometimes maybe a little bit not as good.
And I felt a really strong pull to sport. And in Australia at that time, all sport was on Saturday, Sabbath. And that was really tough, to choose between playing with school friends and sport, which I really enjoyed, and going to church. That was a tough call.
Is there a certain sport you liked?
pick a sport I didn't.
Okay. Curling.
No, that wasn't big. But, traditional Aussie sports like cricket, football, rugby, swimming, surfing.
You like them all.
All of them. Yeah.
So you get through your high school years. You've had a really great experience. You've gone to state schools, but you have also been taught why you believe, what you believe. You've made it personal to yourself. You've been very active and involved in your local church, and you go off now to university. Now, it sounds like you didn't start at Avondale, but you may end at Avondale. Where did you start off?
Well, to go back again,
okay.
sorry.
It's
So
okay.
this is a complicated interview.
You know what? It's not. This is it's you and me talking, and this is how we would talk in real life, right? Stuff comes out as we think about it.
From my earliest recollection, I knew that I should be a pastor. That's just, I sensed that was what I was called to do, to prepare people for Jesus' return. That was everything. And so when I didn't go to Avondale to do theology and prepare for ministry, people were saying, what's going on? What are you doing? We know that you should be going to Avondale. My parents had a little bit to say about it. I can remember my grandfather was a pastor, and my grandmother, his wife, she wrote me a letter which could have been written by another lady that we know well.
Sister White?
Yes. And it was a good letter and a letter that I needed. And it wasn't as though I was doing anything bad. I was still, every day I'd had my devotional. Every day at university I'd be still having my Sabbath school lesson. I'd go to church every Sabbath. Wasn't drinking or smoking, doing drugs, any of that stuff. But I felt incredibly guilty. It was the worst year of my life.
What made you not go to Avondale? Because if this is where you believe you're being called, and I'm going to call this your Jonah time, where it's going to become very miserable until you accept the call that God has given you. What made you go to the Jonah years before you finally do what
You've got me squirming now. I had a girlfriend that wasn't a Christian. And that had an influence on me. But I knew deep down in my heart that I needed to be a pastor. And then I can remember one night when I was at university, as I knelt down and prayed before I got into bed. And I prayed, God, if you want me to be a pastor, you tell me tonight, or just leave me alone. Don't put this guilt on me. Make it clear that you definitely want me as a pastor. And I went to sleep. And that night, Jesus literally appeared to me. And I know without doubt that he called me to ministry. So I didn't want to waste that year. I wanted to get academic credit for the subjects that I studied. So I finished that year, and that was the end of the girlfriend relationship.
Sure.
And I went to Avondale, and that was a tremendous time. That was really good.
So Avondale University now. Was it Avondale University then?
No,
right?
Avondale College.
Avondale College is one of it's our premier Adventist school in Australia. It has a seminary there. Actually just recently met the current seminary president. She's a brilliant woman. What was your favorite class that you took? Do you remember?
I really enjoyed them all. There were some I didn't enjoy as much.
I'm not going to ask you. We try to say all the good things, and we all know that there's classes we don't like.
Yeah. No, but I liked them all. Life and Teachings of Jesus.
Do you remember who your teacher was?
Yeah. Yeah. I still remember their lectures. I can also remember Old Testament, and Lawrence Turner was the teacher for that. And he brought, he's English, I don't know if you know him, but wonderful teacher, and he brought the New Testament to life. It was wonderful. The Old Testament, yeah.
So I'm working my master's in pastoral ministry, which we just had worship for your department, and I know you had heard that. But there is something about teachers who go beyond the theology and to the heart of theology, because when you're in pastoral ministry, that's what you have to do. You know, we need to make religion practical. We need to make it transformational. That's what the gospel does. And I can know how to, you know, take a Greek word and Hebrew word and make whatever, but unless it matters to somebody, it's just an exercise. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's good for us because we understand things, but I can tell these teachers, those are the kind of teachers. They're the kind that they reached your heart, which then helped you be able to share that with others. Mm. So while you are at Avondale, do you ever meet anybody new in Avondale?
That's a loaded question, isn't it? I met a lot of people at Avondale.
You were like, yeah, there was my dean and there was some students. And I mentioned teachers. Were there any lovelier faces than other faces?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Deborah, wow. I looked at her and I thought, this is a goddess. And I thought, she would never be interested in me. And I can remember they thought it was she went to do nursing, and the administration thought it'd be a good idea. We had to do a science subject as part of the curriculum. They thought it'd be a good idea if, you know, the ministerial students shared a class with the
nursing students.
Yeah.
I understand the storyline that's happening here.
And it was biology. And so we were in a class for a whole semester, and I was literally lost for words. I would stand by her and I just couldn't, I was so nervous. I was so in awe of her. She still is beautiful.
She is. Actually, You guys look like a perfect couple. Like you match each other.
Well, I've married up, let me assure you. I've married up.
Well, then she makes you look really good.
And then I thought, wow, imagine going through life with this big regret. And she had, as I found out, she had noticed me. She thought I was, you know, might be pretty good for her sister.
Oh, no.
And then, so I called her and I asked her out on a date with a group. It was a miracle. She said yes. So we went out in a group.
Did she invite her sister?
Not to that one, I don't think. But yeah, and we had a really nice time. And yeah, it's been a wonderful journey since.
How many years have you been married?
35.
And you still glow like you are a student in a biology classroom seeing her for the first time. It is like relationship goals, not because it's probably been perfect or easy at times, but the way your face lights up when you talk about Deborah it's beautiful.
She's a wonderful woman. She's a wonderful person. She's been just the ideal mother to our kids. So supportive as a pastor's wife. She's strong. She's just got a heart of gold. She's generous. You know, I can invite people home at the drop of a hat, and she says, no problem, yes. Did you know?
I'll come over.
Okay, tell us when. Did you know? Well, you know, nothing's too much trouble. She's the life companion of my dreams.
So the first time, I know this is your story, but the first time I met your wife, when families transition to the general conference, they have what they call transition ministries. And the Elder Wilson's wife, Nancy, will often host different gatherings for all the spouses of people who've come in. So when I came, I was at that time, it's different now, but when I came in with that group, I was the only female who I was the person who had been hired. So it was like all these other people, and they were all telling their stories. I'm like, I feel like my husband should be here, not me. But I met your wife then, and all of those adjectives that you just said to describe her, I could sense in that first meeting. She just was so kind and so compassionate. It was a big transition for our family, and she was somebody you could immediately tell that you could trust, that she would be there for you if you ever needed it. It is beautiful. And in a pastoral family, that's a beautiful thing to have. The spouse that's just there, and they're helping you, walking right alongside you in your ministry. So you graduate.
Mm-hmm.
Are you husband and wife before graduation, or do you at least wait until after graduation?
I didn't feel comfortable proposing until I'd graduated, been offered a job, and then I thought, yeah, now's the time. So I started in ministry in the January, and we were married in the August after I'd started in ministry. Yeah.
And now, where did you start your ministry at?
A place called Geelong in Victoria.
I know where that is.
You know Geelong?
I do. One of my friends has lived there for like the last year. She just moved. But yes, I mean, I know very few cities in Australia, but I do know Geelong.
Yeah. A little way out of Melbourne. And
it's pretty there.
Yeah, it is. Famous beaches nearby. Yeah. And it was, they were such a good church to me as well. We had more than one church. We had Geelong Hungarian, which was a smaller church.
And you're a proficient Hungarian speaker?
No. And Hungarian's quite a language to master. Anyway. And we had a small rural church in Colac. And so it was a really good introduction to ministry. I had a great boss, Pastor Lynn Utley. Yeah, he was a terrific intern trainer and coach. He was ruthless and tough. And every morning we'd have every Monday morning we'd have our, meeting together. He was tough and exacting, and that was good for me. And I'd walk into that meeting praying earnestly because, he had high expectations, and I had to meet those expectations, and that was good.
What would you say were some of your greatest challenges in those early years of pastoral ministry?
Probably meeting my own expectations, getting the things done that I wanted to get done. It wasn't as though I was, running off, entertaining myself,
going to the beach.
Yeah, no, nothing like. I gave up surfing.
Oh. Yeah.
I had one surf and that was it. Literally left it. And I used to love surfing. And they're the best waves in the country are 20 minutes from where we were living. And surrendered that. Not that it needed to be, but I was just...
For you, that was what you needed to do.
Well, I was just dedicated to ministry. All of a sudden, I found more pleasure giving and sharing Bible studies than surfing. And I wanted to do that more than surf. It's the greatest pleasure is to sit down with the Bible and share the message with people. It's fantastic.
So what kind of expectations do you place on yourself that you struggled with?
Well, I wanted all Geelong
to know Jesus
and
become a
not just to
Adventist.
know, but to be disciples of Jesus. And Colac, and, it was just, that was this planet's got to be ready for Jesus to come. Let's start with Geelong.
So how do you transition your mindset to realizing that, okay, I'm not going to reach all of Geelong. All Geelong is not going to become the next Pitcairn Island, kind of a thing.
Yeah. It takes time, and maturity. And that's a good thing and a healing thing. You can burn out, flame out very, very quickly. You can rust out too, make no mistake. So it's finding that balance in ministry.
So for a pastor who's maybe getting ready to graduate from the seminary or whatever and getting ready to go to their church, what words of advice would you have? Because you're right, ministry people, there's a 3-year kind of thing. If you can get past a hump or something, you can kind of keep going. What kind of advice do you give to them?
There's a ton I could say.
But based on your early years, what would be the greatest piece of advice you would give?
Treasure your calling. Remember who's called you to ministry and preserve that. The Apostle Paul in Acts never grew tired of sharing his experience with Jesus and how he was called to ministry. The Damascus Road experience for Paul, pivotal in his life. Treasure your call to ministry and treasure your relationship with Jesus. That's a cliche thing, but it's easier said than done.
I don't think it's actually that cliche, because the first class that they had me take for my master's was actually on formation of Christian faith or something like that. But it's all about having our own personal devotional time. It's about prayer and consistent Bible study. Sometimes, and I see this, we're so busy doing the right things, doing the good things, that somehow we forget about that connection. Somehow me working at the general conference, and in our minds, it can become like, oh, this is my connection. But it's not. It's an outpouring of that connection. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's cliche advice. Mm-hmm. It sounds cliche, but actually it's at the core of what I think are probably many ministers' problems.
And especially for dedicated ones, if I can put it that way. Not that I'd want to, mm-hmm. wheat and tares and sheep and goats and that type of thing, but I think of my own experience. Every night I was out. I was either doing something with the youth, or giving Bible studies, or running an evangelistic series. Every 7 nights a week, literally. And I had so many Bible studies going that I had 6 a.m. appointments for Bible studies. Like every night was full. That was the only time available. And like when you...
And someone opted for 6 a.m.?
Yeah. Person coming to the Lord without a Christian background, you clear your diary, you do what you can. You don't want to sacrifice other people that are on the same journey, but you do what you can to help that person find Jesus. And that's what I was doing. But it comes at a price when you're out every night, and what I mean, you're not getting home at 8 or 8:30. Sometimes you're getting home at 11 or later. And sometimes, you come home and adrenaline is still surging, and it's hard to relax. And so it's often later than that before you can get to sleep. And then if you've got a 6 a.m. Bible study, you're not getting out of bed at 6 a.m. You want to look half decent. Mm-hmm. So you're getting up, and it's not a sin to sleep. Work hard, play hard, rest hard, as the old adage goes. So, we do need our sleep. Our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And as we talked about it, you can flame out very quickly. And that was a lesson that I had to learn.
Hmm. So after Geelong. Yeah, I was like, nope, I said it wrong. After Geelong, how long were you there?
2 years.
For 2 years. And then where do you go from there?
Went to 2 smaller rural churches.
Okay.
Also in rural Victoria, Leongatha and Bales.
Okay. Now, if someone were to look at Australia, Victoria is where?
Bottom right.
The bottom right. So it's like that kind of like corner area.
Yep.
I kind of knew, but I figured there's going to be somebody here who does not have Australian geography, as their core memory. Okay, so you end up at those 2 very rural churches, which are probably going to have very different needs than the ones that, well, maybe not your other rural church.
Yeah.
But so you're starting to have to learn how to adapt and how ministry looks different in different locations and different congregations. How long are you at those 2 churches?
Another 2 years. And they were really good churches. One church was in green rolling hills, lots of farmers, dairy farmers. I learned how to milk cows. So when I'd go visiting and work along with the farmers, milking their cows, sharing with them. That's how I did pastoral visitation. And, you meet the family, you meet their neighbours and friends, get into Bible studies with them that way. The other church was Bales. It was on the edge of Melbourne. It's almost consumed by Melbourne now. It's grown in the years. It was a smaller church, 19 members, and it had been 19 years since they had a baptism when I arrived.
Oh, wow.
And it was a nice church. It was a friendly, warm church, but it was just in an environment that was tough to grow. Yeah.
So what do you do in tough to grow situations like that as a pastor?
For me, you pray your heart out, you spend time in the Word, and you visit. Visit the church members, get to know them. Meet them in social occasions, spiritual occasions. Have them to your home, you visit their home. Get to know their friends. Build bridges with their friends. And see where the Lord takes you.
At the end of 2 years, had the church grown?
Yeah. Not doubled in size.
So you did have at least 1 baptism.
We had 3.
That's a blessing, though.
Yeah.
And, those are 3 people who might not have had the chance had you not ended up at that church.
Yeah. And fond memories. And, Leongatha, the other church, it's a lovely church. We had some baptisms there. Those churches were good. And I'll never forget, we left those. It's crazy. Every church you go to, you come to in tears and you leave it in tears. You come to it in tears because the church you've just left, and you leave that new church in tears when you go. That's been our experience all through ministry.
So you've always had very positive, it sounds like, experiences at all of your churches.
Yes. Difficult, but still positive. Some of the churches, don't want to mention too many names.
It's okay. We don't have to mention some of their names, right?
But tough. I can remember standing up and preaching, and first Sabbath I was there, and they said, I did the benediction after my first sermon, and the church said, well, take a seat, Pastor. We're not going to leave just yet. We've got some questions for you. We want to ask you what you believe about these topics. And in front of the whole church, I was asked where I stood on these issues, where my beliefs were. And, this was first date kind of thing. I hadn't met these people before, and that was challenging, but we got over that and we grew past it. And I love those people. We had our differences. We saw things in different ways, but I can genuinely say they were good people in their hearts. They gave me a bit of a difficult time, but, It was a growing experience for me. And to be fair, you know, I wanted to be trusted by them as well. And if that's what it took, okay, I'll carry that cross.
I think a lot of times churches come out of hard situations themselves, which is why they grill a pastor. They want to understand, like, can we trust him? Like you're saying, I have been in churches where some pastors have not left a legacy that was helpful to the church. And it made it harder for the next pastor coming in.
Yeah.
Because, you know, are they going to give up on their faith? Are they going to cause our family to leave the church like our former one? You know, it's like there's a lot of trust we place in our pastors. I think as a mother, I want you to have like good biblical theology because my children are hearing what you're saying, you know, and obviously it doesn't make up for what parents should be doing, but they're your pastor.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to give you the idea that I didn't make mistakes. You know, like I look back at some things, and I was just at a camp meeting in that conference where I started my ministry. And it was a nice experience to be able to apologize to some people for the mistakes that I made. Praise God, they'd forgotten all about it and didn't even remember some of the stuff that I'd been churning on for years. So that was a nice thing.
We all make mistakes. The beautiful thing is that you get the humility to recognize your mistakes and even to apologize years later as need be. So after Bales, was it?
And Leongatha.
Yes. Where do we go from here?
Went to the edge of the outback, a place called Mildura, and had 4 churches in a district. And it's dry, barren desert if it wasn't for the mighty Murray River, which is Australia's biggest river with the Darling. And it only survives by irrigation.
Wow.
So, 4 churches there, a large school, from K right through. And, I was ordained just before I went there and went there as the senior pastor with an intern. And that was my 5th year in ministry. So that was something I wasn't expecting.
4 churches in the outback. You definitely have like a whole, you know, different kind of church. Every single place they move you seems like it's a whole nother kind of thing that you get to learn. And the interesting thing is, because I know where you're serving now, how helpful all of these experiences are. You understand what it's like to be in a multi-church district. You understand more of an urban setting versus a rural setting. You understand what it's like to be in the middle of nowhere, which helps you as you lead or come alongside as an association, other ministers to let them know we're there. We've been here. I've experienced these things alongside you.
And it was quite isolated there. We were, myself and it was Paul in my first year there, we were hundreds of kilometres from another pastor.
Wow.
And so we were really quite isolated. And this is back in predates email and that kind of stuff. I think faxes were invented or came into use when we were there. And this was the era of long distance phone calls. And to call the conference office, that was an expensive enterprise. And the phone allowance, it didn't go too far at all. Like you could blow that on one call.
They really want you to only call in case of emergency. It's like your one phone call.
Yeah. And so, we used to write letters. I'm sounding like a dinosaur, aren't I? I'm not that old.
Actually, the funny thing is, like, I remember writing letters when I was in like high school and stuff, and I don't consider myself that old, but it sounds really old when you're saying it because of all the modern stuff now. But I realize it's really actually not that long ago. It's just we've had such a rapid increase in technology so quickly that it's like something that happened 20, 30 years ago feels like 100 years ago, like a whole nother century. Which it was.
Millennium.
It's true. It's a whole other millennium.
And, you know, I got my first computer there, and I went for the dot one, but it was a shocker, you know. So I got a laser printer, and that cost an absolute fortune.
You were an innovator.
Oh, well, I wanted the best, you know, like, not for me, but this is for the people, you know, this is for the Lord. And that's what it was all about.
Well, he should never have less than our best.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I sometimes think that we, think, oh, well, we should save money and do something. Actually, this is God. I'm not going to save money. I mean, I'm not going to spend it badly.
Yeah.
But we should be giving him our absolute best. Everything we design, everything that we publish, everything should be the absolute best because it's to his honor and glory. It is not about us.
Yeah.
So you serve for how long? I'm waiting for you to say 2 years because that seems to be your current trend.
No, 3 years.
Okay. We add a year.
Yep. Yeah. So 3 years there. And they were good years. The Mildura Church, it's a sizable church. It was like the second or third biggest church in the conference. And it was the second biggest Protestant church in town in terms of attendance. And this is a town of about 50,000 people. So I felt the responsibility of that. And I was also running evangelistic meetings. And these were long-term ones.
What's a long-term evangelistic meeting?
27 weeks.
I have never heard of a 27-week evangelistic series.
Oh, you haven't lived. These are the best.
I think I have.
Yeah.
That's a long evangelistic series.
Yeah. Sabbath afternoons,
Okay.
3 sessions for 27 weeks.
Wait, 3 sessions. Like, how long is each session?
About an hour and a quarter.
So for 4.5 hours.
They were back to back from memory, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And identical for the 3.
Oh, okay. So somebody would come to one. You don't come to, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's really long.
No, that's...
Okay. So basically I can come to one of the slots.
Yep.
And for 27 weeks, you just kind of keep coming back like one time every week and whatever slot works for your schedule. And
that's right. And then midweek we ran seminars on top of the, prophecy seminars or revelation seminars. The idea being is that we wanted to disciple people and visit with people, get to know them, so that it wasn't this intense microwaving, and let people go on a journey and experience it. It's a tough gig. It's not for the faint of heart.
Sounds fascinating to me.
But it's a terrific journey. You can't be whatever happens. You can't break those appointments. You've got to be there. This is your commitment that you sign up. So you can't get a better offer.
So we're about ready as a department. We're actually starting a 14-week, I think it's 14 weeks, small group with our department and with some other people. And it's an hour and a half every single week where we're gathering to disciple and study the word together. And you're right. There is something about this long-term commitment. Like, we have an evangelistic series that lasts a week, but there is something about this ongoing commitment that I've never heard of it, but actually I'm very intrigued by this concept now, and I kind of really love it.
It's hard, and your contact with the people determines the content that you present.
So it's not a set...
It needs to be fluid to a certain extent. You have an overall plan, and you go in with a plan. This is where we want to go.
But we don't need to speed through a topic if people are having questions about it.
Yeah, when you're visiting, you don't want to present testing truths, as we call them, until you're in a close relationship where you're visiting with people and opening the Bible together, so that you're discipling them through this. It's not just, here it is, ready or not, want it or not, bang. So it's the way, it's actually the way things were done in Australia. A long time ago, they would typically run 9-month evangelistic series.
Wow.
And it was an innovation to abbreviate it down. But evangelists and pastors would be working those districts, discipling people, and they wouldn't leave for 9 months. This was their commitment.
Wow. I love it. We're going to talk about this later, outside this. Maybe when I come over, apparently, to your house, because you're just going to let Deborah know I'm popping in, right? We can finish this, because it's actually very intriguing to me. So you serve there. Where do you go from here?
Into the city.
Okay.
To Melbourne.
Because again, we need a new type of an atmosphere for Anthony to be able to gain experience in that he doesn't understand why yet, but the journey makes sense later on in life.
This was inner city. Church called North Fitzroy.
Okay.
And another one called Preston. North Fitzroy is one of the oldest Seventh-day Adventist churches in the country. Ellen White preached from that pulpit.
Oh, wow.
So, another great time.
And how long were you there?
1 year.
Okay. 1 year is a very short stint as a pastor. Where were you?
Through that year, I was invited to join the union. It was in those days it was the Trans-Australian Union, and to specialise in church planting and evangelism.
Okay, so you're going to go to the union level, or you're going to be hired by the union to church plant?
Yeah, the salary came from the union, but a conference would have me for 2 years. So I stayed in the same conference, but this is something that was really quite significant as well. When I was in Geelong, it's on the western side of Melbourne, we would drive past this satellite city called Werribee, 80,000 people, and no Adventist church. 80,000 people. And I thought to myself, why doesn't somebody go there and do something? There's 80,000 people. Why can't people see this enormous population? What's wrong? Well, it was a difficult place. And there was an unpleasantness to Werribee. It had it has, I'm not sure if it still does, but it had the largest sewage treatment works in the Southern Hemisphere. People would call it, the perfume place and all kinds of things. I was
going to say, how did that smell?
There were days, depending on which way the wind blew. But it wasn't, even when it wasn't that bad.
I grew up in a city that had a chocolate factory, and the way the wind blew, we knew the rain was coming because it smelled like chocolate through the town. I think I preferred chocolate to sewage.
But it really wasn't. It was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so as union evangelist, I was asked to go to Werribee to plant a church.
You are the answer to your own question.
And it was fantastic. And I really needed that resilience there because that was tough. We had, there was other churches in the area, and we met with them and we asked who'd like to come and leave their church and come to Werribee and do something there. And there were 13 people that said that they'd come. I love those people. They were just gorgeous people. Some of them didn't speak English, but they loved the people and loved them into the church. You know, we did training, and I'm sorry for getting emotional.
No, I love it because I can tell that the Holy Spirit worked in a very mighty way in that area.
And, you know, we did 6 months of training, praying together. Every Sabbath afternoon, we'd look at what we can do to reach this community. We prayed together, we learnt together, we grew together. I made some mistakes, but I was doing the best I could. And these lovely people. So we started running public meetings. People came. People studied the Bible with us. People were baptized. Only through God. Only through the Holy Spirit. There was nothing about me that changed those people's lives. It was Jesus, His Word, and the Holy Spirit. You go there today, and we were only there for 2 years, but pastors have worked hard in the intervening years. There's a wonderful church there today.
Amen. Church planting is a very tough one. I worked with a church plant.
Let me take a drink.
I worked with a church plant one summer, and it takes a special kind of person because you're giving up your home church. It's harder work than at a regular church where you can sometimes kind of like, fade back into like the pew. It's all hands on deck all the time. And it does take in very much intentionality in caring for your community. I mean, we should have that in all of our churches, but you especially see this at the people who are in church plants. And I'm seeing once again, God leading you into another area that is going to be able to help you be able to come alongside your brothers and sisters in ministry and shepherd them. So you served 2 years in Werribee? I'm not familiar with these names, so this. I feel like I'm testing my memories here. Where do you go from Werribee?
Well, because I was paid by the union, the next conference was Western Australia.
Okay.
So that's from one side of the country
that's
to
like,
the other.
yeah, that's like over there.
That's right.
There's not as much over there, is there?
A couple of 1,000 miles across. Yeah. So, we were based in Western Australia for 3 years. Because it was so far and there was the expense of transporting us across there, they said, hey, stay there for 3 years.
You planted another church?
Well, I ran evangelistic meetings.
Okay.
I assisted with the relocation of a church, which became a church plant in another area. I assisted with that. But Western Australia, we really enjoyed that. That was another good time. The ministry's always been good.
This feels like an echoing. Like every time I say it, you're like, oh, these people, they were really good. It's beautiful that was your experience. But I have a feeling, and I'm going to come to it at the end. I'm going to actually wait to the end to say this because our time is wrapping up. And it's funny, every time I talk to people, they're always like, I don't think I have enough to talk about. And I'm like, I always feel like I'm running out of time at the end. You're serving here. Do you move to a conference or a union level at any point here in the future? Because there's got to be something in the intervening years between you and the GC.
Yeah.
Where do we go?
Okay, so from the union, I was asked to go to the division, the South Pacific Division, based in Sydney.
And what did you do at SPD, is what we call the South Pacific Division. Right. And South Pacific Division is Australia, New Zealand, and like all those islands, and Papua New Guinea, right? Okay. Yep.
Yeah. I was asked to be the Ministerial Secretary for the division, which that was... Yeah, that I was not expecting that, and I don't think too many people were. But as well as that, I was asked to start the Institute of Public Evangelism for the division, to train and coach pastors, encourage pastors in public evangelism and evangelism. So, yeah, that was a 5-year term.
How long have you been at the GC?
I was first elected in 2005 at the St. Louis session.
Okay, so at St. Louis, when you came to St. Louis, I like to find out when people hear that you're being considered for this. What is your first thought? I mean, like,
I had no expectations whatsoever. I didn't expect it. It completely a lightning bolt out of the blue. A total shock.
So you have served at the GC for 20.
Not quite.
No. Sorry, I'm really math. There's a reason why I work in the field I do, and I'm not a mathematician. So how many years is it? Just
17, 18 years.
Yes. Okay. I was like, I was going the wrong direction. So 17 years, 17, 18 years you've worked here. And have you always served in the same position here at the General Conference? Because right now, one of your main areas you look over is that of the elders of the church, which is, having listened to your story, I can actually see why you're so perfectly suited for this role. The way you have loved your members, the way you have discipled, the word you use, disciple, over and over and over again. I can tell that the lay people in your church really mattered as partners in ministry. So it makes so much sense that you come shoulder to shoulder with the elders and help guide them through, you work with Elders Digest.
Yes.
Are there other areas besides Elders Digest that I'm sure, because we all don't just do one thing, but what other areas do you work with?
Well, we have Ministry in Motion, which is a training program for pastors, interns, elders, deacons, deaconesses, anyone doing ministry in a local church. So that's available online, ministryinmotion.tv, so you can access that. We also produce resources, manuals for pastors, elders, deacons, deaconesses. We also we have a book club which produces books for pastors.
How did I not know this?
Yeah. And you ought to be in the book club for about $5 or $6 a year. You get some fantastic books. Talk to me afterwards.
I'm like, sign me up. I love books. I love reading. So
Yeah. So, and another one of my responsibilities is continuing education for pastors. So encouraging them in that, and also in theological ministerial preparation for ministry as well.
So we need to wrap it up here, but I think the thing that I've taken away the most, we've talked some. I watched you, ride up in my church. The first time I feel like I started to see this side of Anthony, this heart side, because this is what I've realized, is that you're an incredibly passionate and compassionate person. I can see it. And I saw this at the elders meeting. I had been recently called to be an elder at our church, and it was a very humbling call. And you got up and you started presenting to us. And as you shared and helped us learn what we needed to do, I could see a passion for helping lay members know how to offer pastoral care to others, but this genuine love for helping us to be a community as a church, that the elder's role is to help bring that church together. It is not just a pastor's responsibility. And as I'm listening to you talk, and as I'm just enjoying hearing what you are saying, I realize that God has carefully brought you here at this place in time for a very specific reason. The world is getting larger and larger, it feels like, and Christianity feels like it's shrinking and shrinking. And pastors can only do so much. But really, the members, the elders, it's our privilege to walk alongside our pastors and to proclaim the gospel. Those people who brought books to your relatives, they were not pastors. They were literature evangelists. They were church members who were serving in different capacities. And we have all been called to proclaim the good news. The way you have spoken today, I can see your heart for people, your heart for the mission of this church, that you don't want anyone to be left behind. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate the transparency and the passion that you have for humanity, really. Not just your members, but for the community. The fact that you're in there milking a cow. It shows me the kind of person you are. You're kind of person who wants more than anything to allow Jesus to be seen through you.
Well, he's the one that really matters. Did you know? And that's a cliche, but without Jesus, we're all doomed. There's nothing. There's only one way to eternal life, and that's through Jesus. There's no option B. That's it. And in a sense, yeah, I know I'm a pastor, and I'm very aware and conscious of that. But I just see myself as a church member on the payroll. There's no difference between me and another disciple of Jesus, you know. We all bleed, tickle us, we all laugh, you know, we all eat rice and beans. Did you know?
They're good.
Yeah. So, yeah, we are in this together with Jesus.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Anthony. We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with my special guest, Anthony Kent. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast or YouTube channel wherever you are tuning in today, because we don't want you to miss another future episode. Thank you for spending this time with us, and join us next week as I get to continue to know the life stories of more inspiring people.